Well, hopefully you're able to get things this morning. So, Pastor George here on the Lexington Street Studios for First Baptist in Springfield. Hopefully, this morning you're at home and warm and you have power and things are going well for you. It's about 8:30 or so, and we're looking at the weather, which looks a little milder than what they predicted, but we're not going to complain about that. But hopefully you're safe and warm at home, and we're going to take a few minutes to walk through some scriptures this morning and spend some time together, and you'll be able to see this, if not now, a little bit later in the day, and that's all right. I want to encourage you, if you've got a Bible, give you a little bit of time, or you can always hit pause if you're watching it not live, and grab yours. But we're going to look at our Sunday night series that we've been working on. So we're going to go to Revelation chapter 8 and walk through that chapter this morning. And like I said, hopefully you're home warm and everything is going well. So give you a moment or two to see if you can hunt that down and look for Revelation chapter 8, and we'll proceed here in just a moment. But glad you're joining in and watching today. Today I am a tech crew of one, and so you'll have to forgive some of the fun moments that we have together. But Revelation chapter 8 obviously comes right after chapter 7, and in chapter 7 we saw this pause, this interlude between the various seals that had taken place. So we had the 6 seals that had been opened. We were waiting on the 7th, and chapter 8 begins to show us what that is all about. In fact, the first couple of verses, verse 1 and 2, open this way. It says, "When the Lamb broke the 7th seal, there was silence in heaven for about half an hour, and I saw the 7 angels who stand before God, and 7 trumpets were given to them." There's this amazing moment that takes place right here. So you have verses 1 and 2, which are between the 6th and 7th seal, and there's this pause, there's this interlude. Um, we saw in chapter 7 this escalation of praise that took place. Um, uh, they had the seal that hadn't been broken yet. We saw them being directed to seal the 144,000 so that they would be marked, would be indicated, it would be seen as the Lord's. We saw the great multitude around the throne, the martyrs that come out of which is the Great Tribulation, there from chapter 7, and then the praising of the Lord and the Lamb, God and the Lamb, that takes place there, and it just this multitude that can't be counted, praising God. You can imagine what the volume would have been on something like that, how loud that could be. And so they're praising the Lord, and then the Lamb steps forward here in chapter 8, breaks this seal, and silence. It goes quiet. Imagine how deafening this moment is. Uh, it, it it just it's an awestruck kind of spot. There's this culmination of history begins to unfold. The scroll is opened. Its contents are seen, the judgments to come and the end, and all of that causes this silence to fall on everyone, everything. This just hush that over while everybody takes in what's about to happen. Um, the verse that comes to mind is that verse in Psalms, the 46th Psalm, where it says, "Be still and know that I am God." Now, we use that verse out of context and on everything. We use it on coffee mugs and plaques and cards, and we use it, and we usually direct it at the church to just be calm and be quiet and be serene and know that I am God. And yet, it's not really the context of that verse. In fact, when you go to the 46th Psalm, it's a little bit different. It opens with a statement that says, God is our refuge. He's our strength. And then as you read on down through, you're going to realize that the group that is primarily aimed at, you see in verse 6, it says, the nations made an uproar, the kingdoms tottered. It's the nations that have come against God. And, and then verse 6 continues, it says, he raised his voice and the earth melted. So God spoke to these nations that came against him. And then verse 10 is the verse that we know that comes into context. And you'll notice verse 10 has quotation marks around it. It's not God telling his people to be calm and be serene and know that I am God. It's God speaking in the midst of this judgment battle kind of moment to the nations that come against him. He's saying, be still, you stop, and his voice settles the matter. And so here in this moment in heaven in Revelation chapter 8, it's real similar to that to me, where people see what's getting ready to happen, and it's as if God said, stop, just be still. And he begins this process. So this be still is not directed at us, but it's at those that are bringing the war, um, those who he's going to defeat with his voice. Be still and know is a battle cry. And so here we have this silence where all of heaven is waiting on God to speak what's going to happen. And of course, what do we do as believers while we wait? While we look to God for what's getting ready to happen, what do we do? A lot of times we pray and we we come to God's presence in that way. And that's not unusual, and that's not too far from what's happening here. If you look back in Revelation 8 from verse 3 to verse 5 or so, that's kind of what's happening. It reads this way. It says, another angel came and stood at the altar, holding a golden censer, and much incense was given to him, so that he might add it to the prayers of all the saints on the golden altar which was before the throne. And the smoke of the incense, which is the prayers of the saints, went up before God out of the angel's hand. And then the angel took the censer, filled it with the fire of the altar, and threw it to the earth. And there followed peals of thunder, and sounds and flashes of lightning, and an earthquake. And so in these verses, we see that before anything happens, while this pause is taking place, while this silence is happening, while people are waiting to hear God speak, the prayers of God's people come before him. And then it seems as though this angel returns them to earth as judgments. It's kind of reminiscent of back in chapter 6 when they were opening some of the earlier seals and we saw the martyrs there essentially asking God, how much longer, Lord? How much longer will we wait before these things are set right? And so these prayers of the martyrs, and then here we see that begin to happening, so they don't have to wait much longer. Look at verse 6. So those seven angels that were mentioned back up in verse 2 had the seven trumpets. They prepare themselves to sound them. And so what we've essentially seen is this series of sevens from chapter 6, chapter 7, here in chapter 8. So we have the seventh seal brings forth this pause. And then we have seven trumpets that are announcing the various judgments associated with this seventh seal. And you're going to see that sequence over and over again as we go through. So we have seven seals that lead us to seven trumpets, that lead us to seven bowls. And then there becomes a question, are these events sequential events? So one seal, two seal, three seal, down to seven, then one trumpet and two trumpet, and so on. Or are they chronological? So the first, second, and third. Are they deepening descriptions of similar events or the same events? So they describe in more detail one another. And really, it all depends on who you talk to or who you read as to which of those ideas you tend to go with. The reality is, it doesn't so much matter. They are fearfully awesome events to read about. They are real, even if the order is hard to pin down. So we're not going to get stuck in those weeds so much, but I want you to see this amazing severity, the awesome fearfulness of these judgments that come with the seventh seal, announced by seven trumpets. And so verse 7 has the first one. It says, "The first sounded, and there came hail and fire mixed with blood, and they were thrown down to the earth. And a third of the earth was burned up, and a third of the trees were burned up, and all the green grass was burned up." And so in verse 7, we see a third of vegetation. And notice it comes down from, like the prayers in verse 5. So it's sent down. So we're still in that sort of heavenly perspective that we started back in chapter 4. But they come down and burns up a third. Can you imagine a third? I mean, we're in a panic state here just because we have uh, X number of states impacted by a winter storm, kind of, and this is a third of the planet we're talking about. So it's a whole different scale of anything that we're accustomed to dealing with. Well, that third becomes a pattern, and we see it happen multiple times. If you look in verse 8, you see the second one. "The second angel sounded, and something like a great mountain burning with fire was thrown into the sea, and a third of the sea became blood." In verse 9, "And a third of the creatures which were in the sea and had life died, and a third of the ships were destroyed." And so you have the sea and the sea creatures and the ships and vessels that are on the sea, all a third of which are wiped out. And it says something like a mountain burning with fire, something of scale, something of size. John is running out of vocabulary to be able to describe the things that he's seeing. And again, it comes down from. So, like the prayers, like the judgment of hail and fire that deal with the vegetation, we see this like a mountain that comes down in verses 8 and 9, and then that pattern continues itself as well. Now, the trumpets that we're reading about as they announce the judgments of the seventh seal are going to be divided much like the seals were. And the first four have to do with the earth, and then the next three are going to be a little bit different. But we're still in those first four. So look at verse 10 and 11. This is the third of these, and we've dealt with vegetation on the earth, we've dealt with things on the seas, and now we're looking at some freshwater problems. "The third angel sounded, and a great star fell from heaven, burning like a torch, and it fell on a third of the rivers and of the springs of waters. And the name of the star is called Wormwood. And a third of the waters became wormwood, and many men died from the waters because they were made bitter." So the focus here is on the fresh waters. A third are no longer available for use, if you will. This great star-like thing falls from heaven, and it has the term wormwood. Now, wormwood is a term associated with bitterness, and but then also notice in these verses, in case we just ran through it a little fast, it says many people, many men, many humans died because of the waters. The waters are made such that they're not just undrinkable, but it's to your detriment to do so. So we have this great star that falls, much like the great mountain that falls, much like the great hail and fire that fell, much like the prayers that were earlier sent back. So these judgments are coming, and they're on a grand scale, something that's never been experienced. The fourth of these first seven comes in verses 12. Verse 12. Verse 12 says, "The fourth angel sounded, and a third of the sun, and a third of the moon, and a third of the stars were struck, so that a third of them would be darkened, and the day would not shine for a third of it, and the night in the same way." The verse almost gets us into kind of trying to figure out mathematically what's going on. There's a third and a third and a third, and all of these things. The core of verse 12 begins to say, okay, so is the daytime a third shorter? Is the nighttime a third longer? Is what's going on here as we read? What's the impact of this? Is it that the light that we have during the day is 75% of what it used to be, or 66% if it's a third? Is it less? How does that work? And I don't think it's so much that it's a third less light, but I believe what's being told here is that for a third of the day and for a third of the night, it is going to be absolute darkness. Not just less light, but absolute darkness. Now, I don't know if you've ever experienced what absolute absence of light is like. Um, as a diver, I have been in caves and caverns in shipwrecks, but caves and caverns primarily, where you get far enough away from the entrance and back up into some of these tunnels and thoroughfares that are underground and still underwater, and turn the lights off that you bring with you, and there is no light for your eyes. You can hold gear and equipment directly in front of your face. It's not visible. It's absolutely dark. It can be very scary in those kinds of moments. And I think that's the kind of thing we're talking about here. Can you imagine the impact on our culture, our world, and our society as these judgments begin to fall? And how quickly they come, how far apart they are, we're not told. But how many of these would it take before you went, okay, God must be God? He, there's got to be something else happening here. It doesn't make sense that this is a man-made event. This is a some other way to account for this kind of moment in history apart from the judgments of God. I don't know that there is. Well, then, this last verse of chapter 8, verse 13, John's describing again. Remember, he's looking from this heavenly perspective back from chapter 4. He says, "Then I looked and I heard an eagle in mid heaven saying with a loud voice, 'Woe, woe, woe.'" Of course, there's three more trumpets to come. And so there's three woes to those who dwell on the earth because of the remaining blast of the trumpet of the three angels who are about to sound. And so we see this warning that takes place before we move into chapter 9 of the final three. The first three largely have to do with the earth. We're going to see the next three. And there's this warning that comes. Now, there's some debate over, there's here in my translations in ASB, it's an eagle flying in mid heaven. And in many of your translations, that's the word that will be there as well. In a few, it will have the word angel there. When you get into the Greek, the spelling for angel, angelos, and for eagle, aetios, are very similar looking words. It's quite possible it's meant to be angel, and just over time that word has gotten kind of out of whack a little bit. But it's also very just as feasible that we're dealing with an eagle flying there. But this appointed messenger of God traveling across the skies, letting people know the next three are coming, and it ends with this warning. Now, we can get wrapped up in the warning and panicky about what's getting ready to happen, but what we can also do is realize this is a moment of grace. This is a moment of perseverance and an opportunity that is sent by God in the midst of these huge judgments for people to have time to come to Him, for people to have a moment to realize what's happening, and time to repent, time to turn in these moments. And we've seen all throughout this particular book, while it certainly has a number of judgments, we see God's grace all over the place as people are given the opportunities to turn back to Him. And yet, many, many, many of them won't. We get so set in our ways, and we get so comfortable with being in charge, being in control, and not turning things over to Him, that we are very obstinate about a lot of those things. And we see that amplified here in this last book of the scriptures. Now, keep in mind, John is writing about the revealing, the revelation of Jesus. So we're looking for Jesus, and we see Him here. He's the one that's opened this, that started this moment as God the Father begins to send these judgments at the end to try to get everybody's attention. And yet, mankind will continually ignore, put off, dismiss, and not be interested in what God has to say. Church, I hope that's not where we end up at. I hope that's not the moment that God speaks to us, God calls to our hearts, God directs us, and we we ignore. We get hard-headed about it. We don't want to listen. We think we know better. I think if you've been watching the weather and the reports that we've been seeing in our part of the country, this historic storm and how awful things are going to be, and then you look out your window this morning and you realize we don't know better. We don't know as much as we think we do. We are not the all knowing, all powerful in any way, shape, or form. And so as we go to the scriptures and God speaks to us about where we need to be, how we need to be, what we need to be, why we need to be, and answers all of those great life questions, He's the one we need to be listening to because clearly He knows better than we do. Well, that's largely the big picture we've walked through at a frightful pace through Revelation 8. And we'll be reviewing again because we picked this study up on Sunday evenings. Now, tonight, we're supposed to have some more weather. It's supposed to be pretty torrential. And so, again, we're encouraging you to stay home and stay safe. But we look forward to meeting with you again here in the not so distant future to worship together as part of God's people here in God's kingdom. So this is First Baptist Church on this cold morning, January the 25th. Looking forward to seeing you again when the weather breaks and we can once again meet together in God's house and enjoy worshiping with one another. Stay safe, stay warm, and we'll be praying for you from the Lexington Street Studios.